It's 8:40 a.m., October 14th, 2025, Caribbean waters, 90 nautical miles north of Venezuela. 3 supersonic missiles just launched from Venezuelan territory. Target, a $2.2 billion American warship. Travel time to impact, 47 seconds. The crew has no idea what's about to hit them. The Caribbean had been a powder keg for weeks. Venezuela pushed its maritime borders 180 nautical miles beyond what international law recognizes. Washington called it illegal. Caracas called it sovereignty. Neither side was backing down. Every single week, over $2.3 billion in American trade flows through these exact waters. Oil tankers the size of skyscrapers. Container ships carrying everything from electronics to food supplies. Supply chains that keep entire industries alive. Disrupting this corridor doesn't just hurt America. It sends shockwaves through global markets within hours. Stock prices drop. Insurance premiums skyrocket. Energy costs spike across continents. The United States issued 4 direct warnings to Venezuela. 4 separate diplomatic channels. 4 chances to step back. Venezuela responded by installing radar blockades along the disputed waters. Venezuelan patrol boats started shadowing American vessels. Getting closer. Testing limits. Daring someone to react first. Diplomatic talks collapsed completely. Phone lines went dead. Ambassadors were recalled. The tension was so thick you could feel it across the Atlantic. Intelligence analysts in Washington warned that something was about to break. They just didn't know when or how violent it would be. October 14th started like any other patrol day for the USS Thomas Hudner. This Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer represented the pinnacle of American naval engineering. Aegis Combat System, advanced radar capable of tracking over 100 targets simultaneously. Vertical launch systems loaded with interceptor missiles. A crew of 320 sailors trained for exactly this kind of scenario. At 8:37 a.m., the destroyer was conducting standard freedom of navigation operations. The mission brief was simple. Monitor the situation. Protect commercial shipping lanes. Make sure international law still meant something in these waters. Captain Richardson had commanded vessels through the Persian Gulf, the South China Sea, and the Baltic. He'd seen aggressive posturing before. This felt different. Meanwhile, at a Venezuelan naval command post near Puerto Cabello, a 23-year-old radar technician named Martinez stared at his screen. A new contact had just appeared. Sharp signature. Steady course. Moving with purpose. He cross-referenced the signal against known vessels in the area. His stomach dropped. USS Thomas Hudner, an American destroyer. In what Venezuela now claimed as territorial waters, Martinez immediately alerted his commanding officer. Within 90 seconds, the information reached the bridge of the VNS Mariscal Sucre, a Venezuelan patrol vessel operating nearby. Officers began arguing. Voices escalated. Some said the American ship was tailing them deliberately. Others claimed it was a clear violation of their expanded maritime zone. A few urged caution, reminding everyone that attacking an American warship meant war, but one voice cut through all the others. Commander Reyes, a hardliner who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. His hand moved toward the communications panel. At exactly 8:40 a.m., Commander Reyes gave the order that would change everything. Fire. 3 P-800 Onyx supersonic anti-ship missiles erupted from their launch tubes. Each missile weighed 6,600 pounds. Each carried a 660-pound warhead designed specifically to crack through naval armor. Each could reach speeds of Mach 2.6, which translates to roughly 2,000 miles per hour. The launch created a thermal signature so massive that American surveillance satellites detected it instantly. The shockwave registered on seismic sensors across 3 countries. Civilians in coastal Venezuelan towns heard the roar and thought it was an earthquake. The missiles accelerated rapidly. Their solid rocket boosters burned at temperatures exceeding 3,000 degrees. Within seconds, they were traveling faster than most bullets. Their active radar seekers locked onto the USS Thomas Hudner. Course corrections happened automatically. These weren't dumb projectiles. These were intelligent weapons designed by Russian engineers specifically to kill American warships. Aboard the Thomas Hudner, chaos erupted in less than 2 seconds. The N-Spy-1 radar system detected the incoming threats immediately. Alarms screamed across every deck. The Aegis combat system, operating faster than any human could react, began running threat assessment calculations. Distance, 32 nautical miles and closing. Speed, Mach 2.6. Impact probability, 94%. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen was officer of the deck. She'd trained for this scenario in simulators dozens of times. But simulations don't capture the sound of the alarms. They don't capture the feeling of your heart trying to punch through your chest. They don't capture the knowledge that 319 other people are depending on you to make the right call in the next 4 seconds. Chen's voice cut through the noise. Weapons free. Engage all threats. The destroyer's Mk-41 vertical launch system came alive. 4 SM-6 interceptor missiles blasted from their tubes in rapid succession. Each missile cost $4.3 million. Each represented years of engineering and testing. Each was humanity's best attempt at stopping something moving at twice the speed of sound. The SM-6 missiles screamed upward, their thrust vectoring nozzles making constant micro-adjustments. They reached speeds exceeding 3,500 miles per hour. Their active radar seekers painted the incoming Onyx missiles with electromagnetic energy, calculating intercept angles with quantum precision. The first intercept happened at an altitude of 12,000 feet. An SM-6 collided with an Onyx missile at a combined closing speed of over 5,500 miles per hour. The explosion was visible from the Venezuelan coastline. A white flash followed by a debris cloud that tumbled toward the ocean. The second intercept occurred 4 seconds later. Another Onyx missile disintegrated in a ball of fire and shrapnel. Pieces of both missiles rained into the Caribbean like burning hail. The third intercept happened at 8,000 feet. The explosion was so violent, it created a temporary radar blind spot. For 2.3 seconds, the Thomas Hudner systems couldn't see anything in that sector of sky. But war is never perfect. War doesn't care about technology or training or the billions of dollars spent on defense systems. War finds the gaps. The fourth Onyx missile came in low, skimming just 15 feet above the wave tops. The destroyer's radar had trouble distinguishing it from sea clutter. The final SM-6 interceptor missed by less than 40 feet. Close enough to damage the Onyx's guidance fins, not close enough to destroy it. The missile's trajectory wobbled but held. It covered the final 3 nautical miles in 4.2 seconds. The Phalanx close-in weapon system, the ship's last line of defense, engaged automatically. The 6-barrel 20mm cannon fired 4,500 rounds per minute. Tracers lit up the sky like a laser show. Some rounds found their mark, but not enough. At 8:41 and 18 seconds, the Onyx missile struck the USS Thomas Hudner amidships. The impact point was just below the waterline on the port side. The 1,660-pound warhead detonated. With the force of 18 tons of TNT, the explosion was so violent it lifted the 200-ton destroyer partially. Out of the water, metal screamed as the hull buckled inward. The blast wave tore through 3 watertight compartments in less than a second. Molten steel sprayed across the engine room. Sailors who'd been standing watch were thrown against bulkheads with bone-breaking force. The lights died instantly. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Fire erupted in the damaged sections. Temperatures spiked above 2,000 degrees. Aluminum fixtures melted. Paint ignited. Smoke filled the corridors so thick you couldn't see your hand in front of your face. The automatic fire suppression systems activated, but the damage was too severe in some areas. Manual firefighting teams grabbed extinguishers and hoses, rushing toward the inferno. Communications went dark across half the ship. The main radar array was offline. Secondary power systems struggled to compensate. Water poured through the breach at a rate of 4,000 gallons per minute. Damage control teams scrambled to contain the flooding, sealing doors, and activating pumps. But they were racing against physics. The ship began listing 7 degrees to port. Of the 320 sailors aboard, 24 were injured in the initial blast. Burns, broken bones. Concussions from being thrown against steel surfaces. 3 sailors never made it out of the engine room. Petty Officer James Mitchell, age 26. Seaman Andrea Flores, age 22. Chief Petty Officer David Wong, age 34. 3 Americans who woke up that morning expecting a routine patrol. By 8:47 a.m., 6 minutes after the attack, Captain Richardson stood on the bridge assessing the damage. 12 vital systems were completely offline. The ship was taking on water. 3 of his crew were dead. 24 more were hurt, and somewhere out there, Venezuelan forces were either celebrating or realizing what they'd just done. At 9:03 a.m., the distress call reached U.S. Naval Command in Norfolk, Virginia. The message was brief. USS Thomas Hudner, struck by hostile fire. 3 KIA, multiple wounded, requesting immediate assistance. Within minutes, that message reached the Pentagon. Within an hour, it was on the president's desk. Within 2 hours, satellite imagery confirmed exactly what everyone feared. Venezuela hadn't just fired warning shots. They'd launched a coordinated attack using advanced Russian-made anti-ship missiles. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an accident. This was deliberate. Intelligence analysts pulled up everything they had on Venezuela's military capabilities. The P-800 Onyx missiles weren't something you pick up at an arms fair. Russia had sold them to Venezuela in 2023 as part of a $2.1 billion defense package. The sale came with training, technical support, and targeting data. Moscow knew exactly what these weapons would be used for, but there was more. CIA signals intelligence had intercepted communications between Venezuelan and Russian military advisors discussing defensive tactics against American naval vessels. The conversations dated back 4 months. This attack had been planned, prepared, practiced. The implications hit Washington like a freight train. If Venezuela was willing to attack an American destroyer in international waters, what else were they planning? How far would they go? And most importantly, who was backing them? Then came the leak. A member of Venezuela's National Assembly, identity still classified, contacted the CIA through a secure channel. What they revealed changed everything. The maritime territorial expansion wasn't about fishing rights or oil exploration. It was about creating a buffer zone for smuggling operations. President Maduro and senior members of his government were allegedly running a massive drug and weapons trafficking network. Cocaine from Colombia was being moved through Venezuelan waters, disguised as commercial fishing vessels. Military-grade weapons were being smuggled into American cities through Caribbean ports. The operation generated an estimated $840 million annually, money that funded Maduro's regime and lined the pockets of corrupt officials. The evidence was substantial. Satellite photos showed suspicious vessels making regular runs between Venezuelan ports and locations in Florida, Louisiana, and Texas. Financial records traced shell companies back to government ministers. Intercepted phone calls detailed shipment schedules and payoff amounts. This wasn't just about territorial waters anymore. This was about an enemy nation actively working to flood American streets with drugs and weapons while attacking American military vessels. The situation had escalated from a regional dispute to an existential threat. At 10:00 a.m. on October 14th, President Trump convened an emergency meeting in the White House Situation Room. Security was maximum level. Phones were confiscated at the door. The Joint Chiefs of Staff sat around the table. CIA Director, Secretary of Defense, National Security Advisor, Secretary of State, the people who decide what happens when America gets hit. The president's words were blunt. They hit first. Now we hit smart. Nobody in that room wanted a full-scale war. Wars are expensive. Wars are unpredictable. Wars cost American lives. But doing nothing wasn't an option either. 3 American sailors were dead. Dozens more were wounded. A $2.2 billion warship was damaged. And the evidence suggested Venezuela was actively working to harm America through smuggling operations. The discussion lasted 47 minutes. Some advocated for surgical strikes against Venezuelan military installations. Others pushed for crippling economic sanctions. A few suggested targeting the leadership directly. The debate was intense but professional. Everyone understood the stakes. At 10:47 a.m., the decision was made. Operation Freedom Thunder. The mission would have 2 objectives. First, deliver a devastating strike against Venezuela's command and control infrastructure. Second, send an unmistakable message that attacking America has consequences that can't be undone. The target selection was careful. The National Assembly building in central Caracas. According to intelligence, this wasn't just a political symbol. It housed the coordination center for the smuggling operations, secure communications rooms, planning facilities, meeting spaces where traffickers and government officials conducted business. Taking it out would cripple both Venezuela's political leadership and their criminal operations. At 5:17 p.m., the operation orders were signed. At 5:20 p.m., a coded message flashed to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. 2 B-52H Stratofortress bombers were put on immediate alert. Crews were briefed. Weapons were loaded. Flight plans were filed. Within 90 minutes, they'd be airborne. The countdown had begun. Venezuela had roughly 14 hours before America's response arrived, October 15, 2025, 7:45 a.m. local time. Caracas, Venezuela. The city woke up to a normal Tuesday morning. Traffic jammed the highways. Street vendors sold coffee and arepas. State television broadcast propaganda celebrating yesterday's defensive action against American imperialism. Government officials headed to work at the National Assembly, confident that their bold move had strengthened Venezuela's position, but 35,000 feet above the city, a very different morning was unfolding. Bunny 1 and Bunny 2, two B-52H Stratofortress bombers. Each aircraft was 159 feet long with a wingspan of 185 feet. Each could carry 70,000 pounds of ordnance. They'd departed Louisiana 7 hours earlier, flying a southern route over the Pacific before cutting back through Central America. Mid-air refueling over the Caribbean kept their tanks full. Not a single commercial radar picked them up. Flying escort were two F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters. These aircraft were ghosts, radar cross-sections smaller than a golf ball, carrying AIM-120 missiles in case anyone tried to interfere. But their real job was simply being present, letting Venezuela know that if they scrambled jets, those jets wouldn't make it home. The real star of the operation was the EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft. This specialized platform carried systems designed for one purpose: turning enemy air defenses blind, deaf, and useless. As the strike package approached Venezuelan airspace,
the Growler unleashed its electronic assault in underground command bunkers across Caracas.
Venezuelan air defense operators suddenly saw their screens fill with dozens of false returns. Phantom aircraft darting in every direction. Every time they tried to lock on, the signal slipped away. Every missile battery showed false malfunction codes. Every communication channel was flooded with noise. Their entire integrated air defense network was effectively paralyzed. The Venezuelan commanders frantically tried to regain control. They switched frequencies. They rebooted systems. They called mobile units asking for visual confirmation. Nothing worked. The electronic warfare was too sophisticated, too overwhelming. For 7 critical minutes, Venezuela's air defenses were completely blind. The B-52s approached from the south, a vector nobody expected. Their weapons bay doors opened. Inside, 5 GBU-31 JDAM bunker buster bombs sat ready. Each weighed 2,000 pounds. Each had GPS guidance accurate to within 10 feet. Each carried enough explosive power to punch through 11 feet of reinforced concrete. At exactly 7:45 a.m., the bombs released. They fell in sequence, separated by 0.8 seconds. GPS guidance systems calculated trajectories in real time, making micro-adjustments to account for wind and air pressure. The bombs accelerated downward, reaching terminal velocities exceeding 700 miles per hour. The first bomb struck the National Assembly's central wing. The impact was catastrophic. The roof collapsed instantly. Interior walls vaporized. The explosion created a pressure wave that shattered windows 3 blocks away. People on the street were knocked off their feet. Car alarms screamed across the entire district. The second and third bombs hit reinforced sections that housed secure communications facilities and planning rooms. These bunker busters were designed for exactly this scenario. They penetrated through multiple floors before detonating deep inside the structure. The explosions gutted the building from the inside out. Steel support beams twisted like plastic. Concrete turned to powder. Fire erupted from every opening. The fourth and fifth bombs struck with such devastating force that seismologists registered a magnitude 3.1 earthquake. The ground literally shook. Nearby buildings swayed. Power lines snapped. The electrical grid failed across 6 city blocks. Surveillance cameras captured the moment of impact. A fireball 120 feet tall erupted through the roof. Debris launched hundreds of feet into the air. Twisted steel girders, chunks of concrete, office furniture, everything that made up the building was suddenly airborne, raining down across the surrounding area. Inside the building, anyone who survived the initial blasts faced a nightmare. Ceilings collapsed. Stairwells were blocked. Smoke filled every corridor. Emergency lights flickered and died. People trapped on upper floors had no way down. Rescue teams would later describe the interior as a war zone. Bodies buried under rubble. Injured people calling for help in the darkness. Fires burning in sections that rescue workers couldn't reach for hours. The casualty count would take days to fully confirm. 12 senior political staffers were hospitalized with serious injuries. 2 were senior advisors to President Maduro himself. Dozens more suffered from smoke inhalation, burns, and crush injuries. President Maduro wasn't present during the strike, a fact that would fuel conspiracy theories for months about whether someone tipped him off. But beyond the physical destruction, the psychological impact was immediate and profound. Venezuela's government had just learned that America could reach out and touch anyone, anywhere.
any time.
No warning, no negotiation. Just precision destruction delivered from aircraft they never saw coming. Emergency sirens wailed across Caracas. Civilians fled in panic. Venezuelan fighter jets scrambled from air bases, but by the time they reached Caracas airspace, the American strike package was already gone. Vanished like they were never there. The entire operation, from electronic jamming to final bomb impact, lasted less than 7 minutes. By noon on October 15th, the world knew what had happened. Satellite news channels broadcast images of the destroyed National Assembly building, smoke still rising from the ruins. Emergency crews pulling survivors from the rubble. Venezuelan state television went dark for 3 hours, then returned with footage carefully edited to minimize the apparent damage. President Maduro addressed the nation at 2:00 p.m. local time. His speech was defiant, but everyone could hear the underlying fear. He called the attack terrorism. He vowed revenge. He claimed Venezuela had shot down 2 American aircraft. None of it was true. Everyone knew it. The images spoke for themselves. In Washington, the White House released a brief statement. The United States will defend freedom of navigation in international waters. The United States will respond decisively to attacks on American military personnel. The United States recommends all nations respect international law and reconsider aggressive actions. That was it. No threats, no ultimatums, no need. The smoking ruins of Venezuela's National Assembly building said everything that needed saying. The international reaction was swift. Russia condemned the American strikes while quietly advising Venezuela to back down. China called for restraint from all parties. European allies publicly expressed concern while privately thanking America for taking decisive action. Latin American countries stayed mostly silent, calculating their own positions. The global economic impact was immediate.
Oil prices spiked $12 per barrel on fears of Caribbean supply disruptions.
Shipping insurance rates for the region tripled overnight. Stock markets across South America dropped sharply.
Venezuela's already collapsing economy went into complete free fall.
The bolivar lost 47% of its value in a single day, but the strategic consequences ran deeper.
Venezuela immediately pulled back its expanded maritime claims. Patrol boats returned to port.
Radar stations powered down. The aggressive posturing stopped completely.
Within 48 hours, Venezuelan officials were requesting emergency diplomatic meetings through third-party nations. The smuggling operations collapsed.
Coast Guard and DEA interdictions in the Caribbean increased 340% in the following week.
Venezuelan government officials connected to the trafficking networks either disappeared or were arrested by Maduro himself, trying to distance his regime from the allegations.
Drug seizures along the Gulf Coast dropped 67% in the following month as supply lines were disrupted. The damaged USS Thomas Hudner was towed to port by support vessels. Repairs would take 9 months and cost $340 million. The 3 sailors killed in the attack received full military honors. Their families received benefits and recognition. But no amount of ceremony could bring them back. No amount of retaliation could undo that loss. The balance of power in the Caribbean had shifted fundamentally. Venezuela learned that attacking American military assets carried consequences they couldn't absorb. Other nations watching the situation drew their own conclusions about testing American resolve. And somewhere in a Pentagon planning room, analysts filed away lessons learned for the next time someone miscalculated. The message was clear. America's patience has limits. America's reach extends anywhere. And some mistakes can never be undone. Subscribe for more military breakdowns.